Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of GIDS Institute, our Board of Governors, faculty, staff, and on my own behalf, welcome you all to this Golden Jubilee lecture series for which we are having the 9th lecture today. In the series, we already had 8 lectures, starting with Professor Saibalkar. He delivered the first lecture. Human capital and self-employment. Then Professor Seema Batla from JNU, she spoke on structural transformation. The third lecture was Professor KJ Joseph. He had given lecture on fiscal federalism. Professor Arup Mitra, who is now with South Asian University, he spoke on issues in urban development. Dr. Arjunan Subramanian from University of Glasgow, he spoke about leveraging significance for alleviating micronutrient deficiency. Sixth lecture was Professor Satish Chandra from Indonesia. He spoke on politics of culture. And the seventh lecture was by Professor Achin Chakravarti from Calcutta. He gave lecture on aggregation. His lecture was on HDI, Human Development Index. The last lecture, 8th lecture, was by Professor Manish from Central University, Ahmedabad. He spoke on India's foreign trade policy. And today we have with us the 9th lecture being delivered by Professor Sangamitra Ilacharya. Before going to the chair, I would like to just introduce the speaker. Today's speaker, Professor Sangamitra Acharya, is very well known. All of you know. She is currently chairperson and professor at Center for Social Medicine and Community Health, School of Social Sciences, JNU. She taught at International Institute of Population, IIPS, Mumbai from 1990 to 1999. She was also director of Indian Institute of Dalit Studies during 2015 to 2018. She has been a visiting fellow at various places: CAS, Beijing, Bell State University, USA, UPPI, Manila, East-West Center, Honolulu, and University of Botswana. She was awarded Asian Scholarship Foundation Fellowship in 2005 and Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute grant in 2019. She has widely traveled across the globe for her presentation and for her studies: Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Germany, Netherlands, UK, USA, Canada, Thailand, Belgium, Finland, and many more. She has published a number of books and papers in national and international journals, and the big contribution of supervising more than 50 doctoral and subdoctoral research. I think this is capital building for the country, which will keep enhancing the education level of the country in the coming generation. She has very widely published many books. I would say the last 2 publications, Inclusion and Access in the Land of Unequal Opportunity, which is published by Springer in 22, and recently she has published What We Owe to the Sanitation Workers by Academic Publishers 2023. So her CV is quite long. I am cutting it short for saving time. We have already circulated it. I hope everybody has it. So thank you, madam. I am sure that today's lecture will be thought-provoking, and topic of the lecture itself is Identity-Induced Health Gaps in Contemporary India, Issues of Disparity and Diversity. So very important topic of human development. Looking forward to your lecture, madam. Thank you for agreeing, and in a short span, you have prepared your paper. Thank you very much. Let me now take the opportunity of introducing Professor Ajra Abidi, who is the chair of today's lecture. Welcome, madam, to GIRI lecture series. Abidi ji is chairman and chairperson and professor at the Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia Central University, Delhi. She has 32 years of teaching and research experience. Professor Abidi has completed Masters in Sociology from Gorakhpur University, UP, Masters of Education, M.Ed from Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and did her PhD in 1995 from Lucknow University. So I can say she is our local contemporary from Uttar Pradesh. Her topic was Conservative and Radical Teachers, a sociological study on Lucknow and its associated college teachers. Professor Abidi is a trained manager of UGC capacity building for women managers in higher education training of trainers. She is member of various academic bodies and women organizations of national and international level. Her research investigates various aspects of gender and society, interfaith, dialogue, and religion. Additionally, she has expertise in the fields of like sociology of South Asia, women empowerment, Islam and Muslim society. She has a fluency in speaking Urdu, English, and Hindi languages. Currently, she has completed a major research project on education, state, and democracy, a case study of Valley of Kashmir by Pandit Baji ISSR. So, most welcome, madam. Look forward to your share remarks in the end. Our discussant, Professor Manoj Agarwal, is he there? Not yet.
Call.
Yeah, he just came to my office. I said, "You're welcome to join physically," but he said, "No, I am comfortable going home and joining. I'll join 5 minutes. I'll be." So hope he's joining soon. I have already sent the link also to WhatsApp. I've sent the link already. So let me introduce him. He will join in the meanwhile. Dr. Manoj Kumar Agarwal is currently professor and head Department of Economics, University of Lucknow. He was the former director, Population Research Center, and director, Institute of Development Studies, University of Lucknow. He has a teaching and research experience of around 35 years. He has been awarded Junior and Senior Research Fellowship by the University Grants Commission for his PhD. He has been awarded several international fellowships like Commonwealth Academy Staff Fellowship, and he worked at the Institute of Development Studies, University of East Anglia, UK, during 2006. He worked as a visiting professor at Department of Economics, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka during 10 years.
Join kar rahi hu, kar in the process.
He has also visited several other countries and worked at various places. He has published large number of research papers and national and international journals. Professor Agarwal has published 14 books on various economic issues and also on economic philosophy of Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay and Vedic Gyan Vigyan. He has special interest in the development issues of Indian economy, among others. So as a head of Population Research Center, he has done a lot of work on health, population, and related issues. So I'm looking forward to his remarks as a discussant today. So this is the brief introduction. To chair the session and start the lecture, we have Professor Agarwal, so he is not going to lose anything. So let's begin the lecture. Over to you, Professor Abidi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Pramod, for providing me this opportunity, and good afternoon to all. Dear all, as you are aware that GIDS Institute of Development Studies, Lucknow is celebrating its Golden Jubilee. I congratulate all the members of GIDS. On this occasion, GIDS is hosting monthly Golden Jubilee lecture series. It is a moment of great pleasure for us that today we have with us a prominent speaker, a renowned scholar, Professor Sanghmitra Sheel Acharya ji. She is from Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, JNU, who will deliver a lecture on the topic Identity-Induced Health Gap in Contemporary India, Issues of Diversity and Disparity. And I think this is the 9th lecture of the lecture series. So dear audience, as a social scientist, I feel that in contemporary India, the identity-induced health gap is a significant issue influenced by the country's vast diversity and persistent disparities. This gap arises from the intersection of various social, economic, and cultural factors that excessively affect different communities based on their identity. I hope the speaker will explore the key issues contributing to this health gap, focusing on diversity and disparity in Indian society. So I will not take too much time, and I invite Professor Sangmitrashil Acharya to share her views. Over to you, Sangmitra ji.
Thank you so much, Professor Abidi. Thank you so much, Giri Institute of Development Studies, the Giri family, my colleagues at the Institute, Dr. Pramod Kumarji, and your team from the faculty and the non-teaching staff at the Institute. I wholeheartedly thank you for giving me this opportunity to be a part of the Golden Jubilee celebration of the Institute. I find myself extremely humbled when I find myself talking on this occasion. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Azra Abdi to have agreed to chair this session, and I also wish to acknowledge Dr. M.K. Agarwal, who's been so kind enough to be the discussant of the paper. And I feel fortunate enough to have had opportunities to have interacted with him at earlier occasions. Thank you so much, Professor Agarwal, for being there. And all other colleagues who are joining online, students and fraternity. What perhaps I'm going to do here as I get this opportunity by the Institute, probably the understanding that I have developed about how health as a notion gets translated in terms of access to care, in terms of access to the services through various kinds of facilities which are available. Are these facilities, are these services available to all of us in a concerted way, or there are differentials that are there when we talk about these access to various kinds of health resources? And therefore, I feel it becomes very important to take note of the gaps which exist in the health scenario that we may be talking about in terms of available services, in terms of the facilities that can be providing us these services, especially in the light of the existing disparities that we have in the country, and also the diversity of which we really take a great deal of pride. We take pride in saying unity in diversity as far as we as a nation are concerned. Therefore, to begin with, I would want to point out identity per se is something which is very, very personal, which is very, very important for an individual to develop the self, identity, ethos about one's own self. Until and unless I am familiar with how do I identify myself, be it the axis of gender, be it the axis of social realms, be it the axis of, let's say, physical, topographical realm, which part of the country I come from, which gender do I belong to, perhaps going beyond the binaries of the gender, and especially in today's context, where we ought to be acknowledging beyond the binaries of gender, for example. And similarly, perhaps the identities which are important in context of the social markers, could be ethnicity, could be religion, could be caste, for example. So we have a whole lot of these social identities which become very important in determining what is a position that I garner in the larger frame of society. Because this is what shapes nearly all facets of our lives. And this division, to my mind, of people, of populations in different social groups, perhaps has also therefore elicited itself in terms of the differential access that we have to different kinds of resources. And like I said in the beginning, right away, the ethnic identities based on dimensions which relate us to the population's group, that could be having certain backdrops of, let's say, a race, social identities, perhaps caste, religious identities, perhaps, in terms of majority religion or a minority religion. Caste and race, if I may bring in pertinently, perhaps as an instance, do have that nuance of dividing people, or rather categorizing people, perhaps that's a better word, into certain kind of superior and inferior groups. If I go back to how the census itself perhaps has listed the superior caste versus inferior caste or population groups for that matter. And therefore, I think historically, social groups categorized as inferior have experienced multiple forms of discrimination due to historical privileges of those of us who are on the higher rung of social ladder and those of us who are on the lower rungs. I think there is an element of this disparity, which is why perhaps this becomes a concern for today's dispensation, wherein perhaps I'm making an attempt to focus on the issues of social hierarchy-induced disparities, and therefore, are there any processes of perhaps exclusion which are leading to health inequalities in contemporary India? And in doing so, I'm also perhaps trying to examine what are these various axes which either enable access to health resources or deny that. So I think the realms of graded structures of inequality, its association with the process of discrimination also becomes something which needs to be examined by way of what we're trying to locate as health gaps. Therefore, very naturally to my mind, the idea of health and well-being become the foundation of human resource quality. And this is what perhaps also therefore determines the development strategy for a country. The development planning of the country rests upon this. And we all know in this regard, therefore, that we as a nation bear perhaps a dual burden of disease. And I see this very consciously when I try to kind of disaggregate at the macro and the meso levels. We are confronting the issues of malnutrition, hygiene, immunization issues of children, as well as other immunizations which have been seen as important for adult population. Also, sanitation, for example, infectious diseases. These have become fairly major concerns when we look at the micro and the meso level. At the macro level too, when we relate environmental health, for example, climate change, for instance, lifestyle diseases, they perhaps, and also the non-communicable diseases to my mind, they all become very important causes that we need to be concerned about in order to understand how these gaps evolve themselves and start, impacting on the differential axis. For example, if you look at cardiovascular diseases, tuberculosis, cancer, diabetes, malaria, dengue fever, for example, chikungunya, some of the respiratory infections, vector-borne diseases, I think they continue to be our, problems that we are still confronting. And if we perhaps go a little ahead and see the challenges which the emerging infections like Ebola, SARS, H1N1, influenza, and now of course COVID-19 are posing, I think we really want to connect with what the existing system through which we are ensuring a system by way of which healthcare can be provided. It is also important to see, therefore, how these systems are creating the differentials also. While on one hand, we do acknowledge that India's achievement in terms of economy perhaps has spilled over to other sectors. We do see some of the demographic indicators improving. Life expectancy, for example, has increased to close to 70 years. IMR and maternal mortality has significantly kind of reduced. We do see these changes happening over the period of time. If you go by the Office of the Registrar General of India's data, which we get through the census, the MMR was 97 during 2018-22, compared to what we have been reeling under during 2001, 300 plus for that matter. So the point, therefore, I'm trying to make is, over the period of time, we do have certain positives that we see in terms of these very important demographic indicators. IMR for sure, which is also an important indicator, which is pegged in the larger realms of development. Human Development Index has IMR as one of the important indicators. And we also therefore see in the same light that on the one hand, when we are experiencing these better upward trends that we are seeing in these indicators, there are also perhaps a proposal that these positive trends can be attributed to the very healthcare service system that we have at our disposal, by way of which there have been realms of these improvements that we're probably talking about. However, when it comes to the norms of, let's say, the number of doctors or clinics or doctor bed ratio or hospital number of health facilities for that matter, thank you so much, we do see that we don't really fall to the norms which probably need to be in place, whether we talk about the WHO or the IPHS itself. Therefore, I think if we bring that in context of what could have been the health policies and programs over the period of time, because the historicity of this understanding is important if we have to understand health gaps, right? So the first comprehensive health policy document, perhaps, that we fall back on is the Health Survey and Development Committee report, which is also known as Bohra Committee report, prepared way back in 1946. And this perhaps was the first detailed plan for the national health services with universal coverage, which we are still struggling perhaps to get to even after the passage of so many years. In fact, this committee laid down the very basic structure for the health planning, and subsequently we see how our policies and programs were shaped because of this committee. Particularly if we see the structure in which our current public health system is located, particularly with the high priority which was given to the child and the maternal health. And needless to say that was the concern at that time, given the kind of population growth that the country was experiencing. However, at this junction, I feel it is important to note that during the Bombay Legislative Council meeting, which was done on 10th of November 1938, about 8 years before the Bohra Committee report came out, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had proposed for the prioritization of health, especially of women and children, disabled people, and workers. And we all have evidence to kind of take cognizance of this through the reports which came out based on the mica mine workers study which was conducted. So the difference, perhaps, what I wish to table right now is, while women's health was put in the center for the well-being of the mother and child, in context of what Ambedkar proposed, unlike in today's proposition, where it is largely, or at least at the time when we initiated with the family planning program, if I may bring in so, which was largely adhering towards some kind of control of population. So going by that, perhaps when we see that state has also made concerted efforts to bring on certain contexts through which health can be made accessible, healthcare services can be made accessible to different layers of people. As a state, I feel we have miles to go through the dark and lovely woods of public health system, which perhaps have mesmerized or rather confused in many ways the healthcare seekers before they can really take any, they can rely on anything. The intention, therefore, here is to bring the disparity in access created by the public-private sector itself when we contextualize access to health right away. And I say this also because if you look at the data, only 33% of the rural population and 26% of the urban population depends upon public health for treatment, public health sector for the treatment. And when we look at this, poor populations which are, if I say disadvantaged, particularly economically, they depend upon the public health system more as compared to rich, and the reasons are very obvious. But even among the poorest income class, a majority depends upon the private healthcare providers for the reasons wherein loss of wages by way of queuing up for a long time, etc., non-availability of the provider, etc., become a reason to do that. So if we look at the India's expenditure on public health care during 2022, I think it kind of comes close to about 2% of the GDP, and the allocation for health in the recently presented interim union budget for 2024-25 was also kind of suggestive of the fact that as we are approaching the deadline set by the National Health Policy to achieve the target of increasing India's health expenditure to 2.5 of its GDP by 2025, the idea perhaps was to ensure that we inch towards that. Therefore, I think in this backdrop, it becomes imperative to understand how do these factors operate, how do these factors become operational in recognizing the gaps which are existing across regions, across social groups, and therefore what can be the preparedness for mitigating or at least minimizing these gaps that we can have in context of the India that we are in today. I'll make an attempt to connect some of these different axes that I'm talking about by way of linking how do we see identity becoming an important element in creating on one hand and also making an attempt to mitigate the gaps that I'm referring to. If I attribute the identity which are based on different kinds of social attributes, and like I said in the beginning, religion, caste, ethnicity, these identities have been known to function differentially. And when we look at any output which are in consonance with these identities, a realm of inequality is also visible. Arguably, while religion, caste, ethnicity differ in theory, and I'm sure we'll all agree to this, it is imperative to understand, to take cognizance of the fact that health disparities, as they are important element of putting populations in different kinds of categories, that's precisely why it becomes important to take cognizance of. And I'm borrowing from the work of Jones, which appears in 2000, how do these differentials become important in understanding the barriers that could therefore be created? There can be three ways in which we understand this. One is institutionalized marginalization, if I may use that word, again trying to convey that how these barriers could be created and therefore the efforts that can be made to overcome these barriers. So one could be institutionalized marginalization, the other could be personally mediated or directly interceded marginalization, and the third one is internalized marginalization. Let me try and disaggregate these three. If we're talking about the institutionalized marginalization, we see that it gets manifested in the historical events, historical processes, but it continues to persist, be evident even today because of the contemporary structural factors that have in many ways, if I may say, perpetuated historical and social injustices. The second one, directly interceded marginalization, occurs on an interpersonal level, and it is evident in lack of respect towards underprivileged communities by offering poor or perhaps no services or information about opinions, including healthcare choices, for example. In fact, it's also evident in many ways that there is a bit of an avoidance of contact by the others, in terms of, making sure that the connect, which is very, very, obvious when we are interacting with others. There is a sense of, there's a sense of not having that same comfort in interacting with the others. And I'm making use of Jones' work again, wherein if the African American versus white Americans are in similar proximities, close proximities, perhaps there is a natural process through which, as a white American, I might be clenching the purse hard closer to myself if I see somebody who is unkempt and perhaps of African American origin. And perhaps also evident from similar kind of experiences that even if a seat is vacant in a bus, I wouldn't sit close to it, too close to a person who I may not be very comfortable sitting with, and I'm referring to the African Americans as compared to the white Americans. These are the experiences perhaps which are evident in housing, in employment, in the realms where these have become evident in even other studies by scholars like Carnero and Farr, Flagg, and a couple of others which perhaps can be brought in over here. And I think if we translate this in context of the South Asian scenario, those of us in the margins are affected by marginalization, leading to perhaps exclusion from access to many resources. And in India, if I take the evidences from minorities, tribal communities, Dalit populations, there are reports of experiencing prejudice and othering against them. Especially if you look at the rural settings, Dalits continue to live in the outskirts and away from the rest of the communities who are placed at a higher social hierarchy or higher social rank. Their competence is suspected, their aspirations are often ridiculed, and the insinuation that perhaps can happen in cases where there is an expression of achievement. Healthcare is another domain where differentials are evident, employment again. And I'm saying this on the basis of different research which have come out from different researchers, different social scientists. Mahapatra's work spots at education. Employment is very evident from Thorat and Atwell's work. Banerjee et al. Talk about housing. Labor market, again, Thorat and Madheshwaran, if I may bring in that. How the number of people who are in police custody and in jails are outnumbered by the Dalits and the Muslims as compared to non-Dalits and non-Muslims, for example. So we do have literature which is informing us about this. Therefore, if I bring in the third connector, the third axis that I was referring to in terms of the gap which it is creating, maybe if I bring in again the minority status, the ethnic identity, or the caste identity, and reflected through the internalized marginalization, I think it takes me back to this argument of the fact that it is a continuum from historical times to the present day and occurs when populations who are stigmatized by way of these identities perhaps end up believing on the negative messages which are created for themselves, so much so that they accept a low value for themselves in terms of the worth that they could be identifying for themselves. And this is where perhaps I'll want to invoke the Cooley's thesis of self-image. It is therefore evident in the preference shown by the African American healthcare users for a white physician who's perceived as a better physician as compared to the others. Similarly, when we draw from a study done on women and children in the western part of the country, a similar sentiment is is visible when we're talking about the Dalit healthcare provider as compared to the non-Dalit healthcare provider, and the reflections of the users by way of the identity. The Dalit provider is being undermined by the non-Dalit user as compared to the Dalit user. So I think this is where the internalized marginalization becomes functional and therefore restricts the capabilities of not only one's own self, but also kind of operates as a major stimulus for perhaps assimilating into that dominant ethos of the social structure, wherein those hierarchies become more than evident, wherein it's telling us to kind of accept the larger context in which those hierarchies are made to function. Therefore, I think if I kind of connect something which is being gathered from the literature, and I'm trying to also make an attempt to superimpose some of the empirical evidences through the data sources. It is perhaps important, therefore, to get into this realm of how do we establish the association between social identity and marginalization over and above how literature and large data sets are telling us. I've been trying to gather literature from across various sets of arguments that are there, which are kind of alluding to this kind of inverse relationship. We do get a sense of how this uneven levels at which not only the imagination of care provisioning, but also the utilization of care services is existing by way of the identity of both of the user on one hand and of the provider on the other hand. And I draw this again trying to base my argument from the literature, which is giving us a sense of ethnicity, racial discrimination on one hand, and the South Asian scenario where we can bring in the question of minority status vis-a-vis religion, and also the caste as an identity. So if I go by, to begin with, from the experience which is evident vis-a-vis the racial discrimination, the association evident from the literature between racial discrimination and cardiovascular health outcomes, for instance, have really been giving us a sense that ranging from the high risk of hypertension among African Americans to about there are evidence where not a very significant kind of an association has been visible. Quoting from the study of 2010, Chai et al., when we look at when this study is explored, it's fairly evident that the relationship between internalized negative racial group attitudes with occurrence of racial discrimination and cardiovascular illnesses, particularly among the African American men, we do see that there is an association which is inverse in nature, and also therefore confirming that there are negative beliefs about the African Americans, which was related to let me say this disease, evidence of the diseases that we could be having. Therefore, if I am trying to move ahead from there to our context, it becomes easier to draw, or rather, I'm trying to make a connect from what we get from the studies such as that done by Kreger in 2000, Pample et al. In 2010. While these associations have been evident, there is visibility of association between the racial identity vis-a-vis the differential outcomes. Not much of the literature is actually talking about the measuring the quantum of this relationship, whether largely inverse for that matter. But what is important to note is that the chronic stressors have actually led to increase in what we were talking about in terms of hypertension. It very clearly shows that it not only we can identify these chronic stresses, but we can also therefore get a sense of how the aspirations and ambitions can be obstructed. And the association which is drawn particularly by the work of James et al. Through, let's say, end of 80s to almost till the middle of 2004, 5, if I recall correctly, wherein a concerted study tells how the African Americans put in far more effort to be able to prove themselves at least equal to the white Americans. Now, if I'm trying to perhaps bring in this backdrop, perhaps build the argument for the South Asian scenario, we do have literature which is informing us about the inequality, poverty, all these stresses that are there, particularly if you're tracing them in context of nutrition, into context of education, in terms of employment. All of these have had negative impact on health outcomes. Juanike Bordoa's study of 2014 and 2015 very categorically tells us about this inverse relationship that I'm trying to perhaps connect my argument with. It very clearly kind of establishes how the psychosocial nuance in which the underprivileged communities are embedded has an impact through the lived realities of subordination, humiliation, subservience in almost everyday life, that gets exhibited in health outcomes, both the physical health as well as the mental health, and therefore perhaps the relevance of the psychosocial context of health. And I think we can draw that very clearly from how some of these more recent data sets are talking about the differentials of health outcomes that are visible across social groups. If I draw from what the Global Hunger Index places us at which position as a nation, we haven't been faring very well. In 2019, we were 102nd position out of 117 countries, perhaps a little better from 2018 when we were 103 among 132 countries. Now, in all of these backdrops, if we try to locate how access to basic health facilities and take two indicators, perhaps distance to the basic health facilities and availability of the providers. If I fall back on the National Family Health data over the last 3 rounds, it very clearly tells us that while distance has not been as important, or let me put it this way, while in NFHS 3, which is 2005-6, distance was a problem for accessing health facility to about 27% of the women who were among the scheduled castes. That's how their administrative categorization is, which reduces to about a quarter of such women by the time we reach 2019-21 NFHS 5 data. Similar kind of shift is evident when we are looking at the scheduled tribe population or other backward castes, or even the others. The difference perhaps which is important for us to take note of is the gap. The quantum gap is much, the shift from a share which is already at a higher level to the percentage points to which it has reduced could be much lesser for those who we could say as the underprivileged groups as compared to those who could be the privileged groups. Now, the point, therefore, I'm trying to make, in the backdrop of the policies which the state has been putting in place over the period of time, revisiting them over the period of time as well, we do see that the gaps are still existing, and therefore perhaps there's something else which needs to be done very clearly. So if we're looking, we can corroborate with other set of data also, which also throws up a similar kind of picture. While there is an improvement, upward trends in terms of outcome data or even any other process data that we might want to see, the gaps don't seem to be reducing very much as we might want to think about. And therefore, to my mind, what becomes important is to perhaps take cognizance of these persistent gaps while there has been improvement in most of these indicators, health indicators that I can go on to disaggregate IMR and CMR data also. But the point, therefore, becomes relevant in terms of conversation with the policy making process is that these persisting gaps can be minimized or addressed when we can bring about the convergence in this gap as we're moving ahead towards, particularly if you're going by the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals for that matter. We can pick up any health service data and we'll find a similar kind of outcome reporting that's happening. Therefore, I probably will want to go back to where I'm drawing from in terms of my argument that I'm making in terms of connecting the idea proposed by Sherman A. James in terms of why do those of us who are at the marginalized realms uh, tend to absorb ourselves in terms of working perhaps more hard in order to ensure the perceptions that I was talking about in a little while earlier, to kind of set that goal so that I can prove my worth as equal. And that's where perhaps I'm trying to bring in the idea of John Henryism and the looking glass theory, which is talking in terms of the perception of self. I'm sure many of us are familiar with John Henryism, which was envisaged by Sherman A. James in his work through the 90s, and based on that we get his work, through which I was referring to a little while earlier, mid 80s onwards. He starts publishing after rounds of corroboration that he did for his work. Now, he was an African American epidemiologist and public health researcher, Sherman A. James. He examined the racial health disparities between African American and others, which is Hispanic, Asian, and white American communities in North Carolina. And as part of the study, he interviewed an African American called John Henry Martin. Now, despite his impoverished state, coming from very, very humble backgrounds, poor sharecropper, the low levels of education, without much resources, he toiled hard to eradicate, those markers of, the slavery that his ancestors could have endured. He wanted to overcome that. So, working vigorously, he tried to kind of get out of this identity as a slave, and he kind of did as much work possible, earned money, worked on different farmlands so that he could make himself and his dependent free of that dependence on the sharecropping, etc., etc. So he did manage to buy about 75 acres of land, of farmland, before he could even be 40 years of age. But what was happening, that by this time, he was already, by the time he perhaps got into his 50s, he was already suffering various kinds of morbidities, hypertension, arthritis, peptic ulcer, etc., etc. And unfortunately, he died before he could probably cross his mid 50s. I'm bringing in this story particularly because this is what perhaps gave genesis to the phenomena of John Henryism, which I'm trying to relate with the genesis of the health gap, in which I seek to kind of draw your attention. Now, this phenomena, to my mind, is a reflection on a very strong behavioral predilection to develop some kind of mechanism for overcoming social and economic stressors, in this case by African Americans during the period which followed the Civil War. Now, a kind of social behavioral adjustment, if I may say, wherein the newly found freedom was propelling this to be done. Therefore to endure this hardship, which was actually because of the historical deprivation, and therefore to get closer to those identities, to those nuances, to the realms which were the American values. It was kind of where in this particular case, this person, John Henry, was trying to attribute himself in order to get there. Now, in all of this, this psychological stress, therefore, which made him do all of this, kind of aggravated the conditions which brought him closer to not only morbidity but also to mortality. Therefore, hypertension to my mind remains a very important morbidity condition in context of such populations which have experienced historical marginalization. And if I go by James' work based on these experiential information that he gathered, a 12-item scale was developed, which was called John Henryism scale for active coping. Or this was the scale which was later subsequently used to evolve all those papers which went on to explain why this association becomes very important. And therefore, I think if I connect this realm of John Henryism to looking glass theory of self, which, like I said, the sociologist Charles Horton Cooley, way back in 1902, this is where perhaps the element of how do I perceive myself as an individual is dependent on how the others view me as an individual. The social interaction acts as a reflection on how others perceive the individuals, and that perhaps governs the totality of how I see myself. People use, various kinds of ways to label people, right? Lazy, just as an example, or talkative. Some of these labels which we put to people perhaps are elements which determine shaping certain kind of values and behaviors which make the individual. Individuals develop their concept of self, therefore, by observing how the others are perceiving them. The concept of self, therefore, evolves within a social setting, not in isolation. How this social setting evolves vis-a-vis interactions. How does this social setting will evolve vis-a-vis, if I may say, the norms which are set up. Therefore, in practice, if I may say, if contextualized vis-a-vis, let's say, underprivileged populations, historical deprivation imposes a fairly pitiable image, if I may say, with all consciousness. This is where perhaps the differential axis leads towards this kind of perception about self. This also therefore influences depreciating image, if I may say, of self. This also conjures the likelihood of, to my mind, Henryism, John Henryism becoming functional. Perception of self and the degree of John Henryism will be governed by the feedback which we get from others about one's own self. If it is positive, self-image will be very robust, leading to high self-esteem. But if it is inverse association, how will it'll obviously have a negative impact, and all of this will immediately translate itself in terms of explaining the health outcomes also. However, this can then be very, very clearly related to the larger context wherein this image, construction of image about self can be rested in terms of, if the image is negative, the low self-esteem will kind of create this strong inverse association with health, again impacting on the health outcomes, which are likely to be poor. Therefore, I think as I probably try to get towards drawing the connect in terms of how these processes of constructing the self-image by way of this consciousness which is evoked by John Henryism, by the looking glass theoretical preposition that I could be putting in, I think the realms of exclusion and discrimination cannot be escaped, cannot be kind of not looked at, particularly if you're trying to, like I said, understand the gaps, because these are the realms, when we are not acknowledging the presence, exclusion of this acknowledgement by way of denial of access, not only of the resources but even opportunities and services to certain groups by way of various kinds of social identities. I think it becomes important, and therefore, to my mind, exclusion necessarily has to be kind of brought on board in terms of bringing in this explanation, particularly if we see how how the realm of exclusion in terms of historical context becomes important in kind of creating that enabling environment vis-a-vis perhaps making sure that these hindrances can be overcome in any which way. Because if you look at, let's say, for instance, the social environment for most children of underprivileged populations, which perhaps includes both personal and familial experiences of varied kinds. How do we peg these in terms of making them functional in, fostering certain kind of leveraging wherein the stressors can be minimized? And therefore, I think it really becomes important to see the association with maybe in one way the risk-taking behavior, unhealthy behavior, which could be related to the realms of even very life-taking lifestyle realms of the behavior, if I may say so. So I think it might be important to get to the larger context of health being influenced by a range of social, economic, environmental determinants, social and physical both for that matter, in order to ensure the access to quality care through prevention, through policies, through the system within which perhaps these policies can be made functional. They seemingly play a very important role, not only by way of creating those environments of access, but also perhaps therefore the need to examine and address the perpetuated gap which has been existing over the period of time. So something in addition, therefore, which could be perhaps group-specific policies in order to perhaps cushion some of us far more than perhaps what exists at the moment, in order to ensure that access to health resources is materialized through availability of various other resources which create a positive environment of not only overcoming this nuance of John Henryism, but also developing a positive image of self. Therefore, I think I would want to close by saying that socially inclusive growth strategies which enhance the upward trends of all possible opportunities are important in bridging these gaps, which are very important to vis-a-vis the concerns for health. Thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Apati.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Acharya, for your excellent and vibrant presentation. It was a wonderful presentation, and you have systematically covered all the important aspects, which is very important to know in the contemporary Indian society as well. So in the theoretical perspective, you have covered the Charles Cooley's looking glass cell theory idea, and with reference to that, you have discussed the issue of gender inequality and as well as gender gaps, health issues, the marginalized sections, all you have covered. So thank you so much, and I congratulate you for this excellent presentation. And now I want to give some important remarks which is related to your presentation by my side, though it is not appropriate to say this is a remark. Just I want to say a few words with reference to my particular idea. That you have rightly mentioned the key issues contributing to identity-induced health gaps in contemporary India. And you have rightly mentioned that it may be in several forms. And you have highlighted these several forms in Indian society as well. It may be in the form of caste discrimination, because we are looking in the present scenario that historically the caste system has created deep-rooted inequalities in our society. Lower caste communities, especially Dalits and Adivasis, often face discrimination that affects their access to healthcare services, leading to poorer health outcomes as well. And when we are coming to the socioeconomic status, we can mention here that the socioeconomic status is closely linked to health. Higher poverty rates among lower caste and tribes limit their ability to afford quality healthcare, nutritious food, and proper living condition. And already you have mentioned all these things in your presentation. When we are coming to the, with reference to gender part, we can mention that in the context of gender inequality, patriarchal norms are very much deeply rooted in our society that promote gender-based discrimination, which remains pervasive in India. Women and girls, even today, receive less medical attention and nutrition compared to men, leading to highest rate of malnutrition, anemia, and maternal mortality. On the other hand, women, particularly in rural areas, face barriers to accessing healthcare, including lack of transportation, financial dependency, and societal restrictions on mobility. So this is another important aspect. We have to think in appropriate way. How can we suggest certain policies, or we can suggest certain kind of strategy to understand these issues as well. Professor Mitra, you also discussed healthcare infrastructure. Within that, you have pointed out that urban areas tend to have better healthcare infrastructure and more hospitals. In contrast, rural areas suffer from inadequate healthcare facilities, leading to significant health disparities. Marginalization, you have highlighted. Religious and ethnic minorities such as Muslims and certain tribal groups often face marginalization and discrimination. This marginalization can result in poorer living conditions, limited economic opportunities, and reduced access to healthcare services. When we are coming to the cultural barriers point of view, that we can add here that language and cultural practices can also pose barriers to accessing healthcare, as healthcare providers may not be culturally competent or sensitive to the needs of these communities. When we are coming to the geographical disparities, you have mentioned the harsh conditions or some kind of disparity which is related to geographical areas. Regional variations is very much present in Indian society. There are significant health disparities between different regions in India. States in the north and northeast, for instance, often lag in health indicators compared to southern states, which have better healthcare systems and policies. Environmental factors. Regions with harsh environmental conditions face additional health challenges impacting the overall well-being of the population. So there is a need to address the health gaps, and these health gaps may be inclusive in the form, we can address these inclusive health policies. Inclusive health policy, when we formulate this policy or we introduce this policy that especially address the needs of marginalized community, can help bridge the health gap. This includes implementing caste sensitive and gender sensitive health programs, universal health coverage, expanding universal health coverage to ensure that all citizens, regardless of their socioeconomic status, have access to essential healthcare services. Improving healthcare infrastructure. in the present time, we are looking that in rural areas, there is a lack of healthcare facilities. People are not getting appropriate health facilities there. The rural health services, investing in healthcare infrastructure in rural areas, including building more clinics and hospitals and training healthcare workers, is crucial to reducing rural-urban health disparities. Telemedicine, leveraging technology to provide healthcare services in remote areas can improve access and reduce the gap. So I think these are some important initiatives we can take to improve or to minimize the gap which is related in the name of health facility in India. Awareness and education, as you have mentioned in your presentation, that is also very important aspect. But within that, health literacy programs, implementing health literacy programs that educate people about health issues, preventive care, and available services can empower communities to take charge of their health. Community engagement is also important. Professor Sanghmitra, you have pointed out all these things, just I am repeating it. Engaging with community leaders and organizations to promote health awareness and reduce the stigma, which is in the name of, which is very common in the society, social stigma associated with seeking healthcare. So we have to think on these areas as well. So addressing social determinants of health, I can mention 2-3 points here. The economic empowerment, improving economic opportunities for marginalized communities can have a positive impact on their health. This includes providing vocational training, education, and financial support. Apart from this, I want to add one more point here, nutrition programs. Though there are some nutrition programs which is very much common on paper as well, not at the grassroots level, we are looking what is the reality. Nutrition program, implementing targeted nutrition program to address malnutrition and food insecurity, particularly among vulnerable population, such as children, women, and the elderly. So we have to think all these things. So with these words, I congratulate you and thank you so much. So I can conclude from your lecture, from your point, from your idea, the identity-induced health gap in contemporary India is a multifaceted issue rooted in the country's diversity and deep-seated disparity. Addressing this gap requires a comprehensive approach that includes policy interventions, infrastructure improvements, educational initiatives, and efforts to tackle the social determinants of health. By focusing on these areas, India can work towards achieving health equity and ensuring that all citizens have the opportunity to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. So these are my remarks. Though I am not able to say these are my remarks, just I have summarized your lecture in my words as well. So thank you so much, Professor Sanghmitra Chana, for your wonderful presentation. With these words, I thank all the speaker and congratulate the organizer to holding this lecture. I now invite our esteemed discussant, Professor M.K. Agrawal, former head of Population Research Center, Lucknow University, to share his insights on this important topic. Over to you, sir. Professor Agrawal.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity, and particularly Professor Pramod Kumarji for roping me in between such enlightened discussions. And I was listening very carefully Sanghmitra's lecture, and after a long gap, I had this occasion to listen to her, see her. And it has been a very elaborate discussion. It has almost touched several points, although health is such an area that nobody can claim that all the issues have been touched. And its dimensions are not very limited. Its dimensions are not only vast, quite deep-rooted as well. There are many myths that Sanghmitra has also pointed out regarding the health issues. And the myths are there from the date that Sanghmitra initiated, that is Pura Committee discussion. The myths started in the health sector from there on. I was patiently listening to understand what happened in the recent years, but maybe Sanghmitra was more concerned about the historical evolution of the health policies, health scenario in Indian context. She has raised several valid issues ranging from lifestyle, climate change, children, sanitation, hygiene, malnutrition, women, children, and definitely emerging challenges, diseases, cardiovascular, and things like that. So I believe the canvas has been too wide. Given the nature of the topic, it has been too wide for the audience. Anyway, the issues are quite relevant. And given the context that it is about the identity in the health sector. Now the question is, why this emerged? Why this health gaps emerged? Does it persist now? That is the question. It emerged because of the fallacy of the Vora Committee itself. I have been the director of Health Institute at Lucknow University for more than 6 years, and we have conducted several primary level studies besides the secondary data studies that we recently published in EPW and some international level. I'm not going to discuss those are the issues. Simply, I wanted to drive home that things are rapidly transforming. It is for good or bad. It is for the scholars to debate after my submission. The issue is Bora Committee was not a truly health policy. It was a medical policy. Because who knows it better than Sanghmitra, that it was made by doctors, not by the health experts. Doctors who were more keen in their own profession's growth. Unfortunately, India has been a victim of medicos, not the health. So that has been a greater type of vicious circle within the country. And fortunately, Dr. Anis Ansari is also here. He is witness to such type of, dichotomies and what to say, not to say I'm here, because I have encountered so many top experts they claim to be. And our, because Sanghmitra highlighted several issues from American context and South Asian context. Now India is not part of the South Asia in terms of health strategy. Here I would like to underline this point because it has deviated from this after a long gap. Moreover, it would have been better if Sanghmitra has brought in NHFS report 4 and 5 that has been showing much better scenario, and I'm going to paint in that better scenario. Better scenario in terms of the data and its meaning for this type of discussion. One particular point I would like to underline is between NHFS 4 and 5, you'll find there is a drastic improvement in sex ratio. Our paper is getting published on that. In India, if we trust NHFS, then we have to trust that sex ratio in India is not unfavorable to women. It is largely favorable to women in NHFS 5. Secondly, why this gap emerged? Other than the point that has been discussed about the lifestyles, and lifestyle is a challenge for middle class, not for the identity groups, basically. This is my take. Maybe we cannot generalize it, but definitely my take is it is a middle class challenge, and our study shows that thing. The challenge of the poorer masses have been their low level of income, sanitation, and public access to healthcare facilities. Does that persist now? this is to be debated, because there are several issues that can be addressed through health policies. There are certain issues that can be addressed through, as has been discussed rightly by Sanghmitra and the chair, through cultural variations also. That cultural taboos are now being, dismantled largely. Women are not that type of issue that was in 20 years back or 30 years back. After 1991, women have transformed a lot, and that is true for the healthcare also. They have been more demanding. If I say like that, what is the demand for healthcare facilities? So my take is there is more demand for healthcare by the woman itself, particularly the young woman, that I can suggest. And here is the role. If Swachh Bharat Abhiyan has been a turning point, then it is the public participation in terms of in-house toilets. It has been through, you can say, Ujjwala Yojana. It has been through change in lifestyle and yoga-like of things. And you'll find that GDP growth, I have done in my book, GDP growth from the health sector is declining. This is a positive sign. If GDP growth from the health sector is increasing, my take is it is not a good sign. If it is declining, if Dr. Anis is maintaining good health because of his lifestyle, it means he is not contributing for the health GDP. So similarly for the other people that is happening. So people, and particularly after Corona, I would have been happier to listen if the Corona and post-Corona healthcare structure would have been discussed here, so that the things would have been driven home much clearly. But still, I believe that I'm not taking much time already. It has been more than 1 hour. So I stop here by suggesting it has been a wonderful presentation. However, there remains few gaps, serious gaps. It would have been updated and recent takes would have been incorporated in the lecture. I leave it here. Thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. With this, I open the floor for question answers. Audience, your comments and suggestions are also welcome. Yes, Dr. Anis Ansari, please ask your question. It should be very brief.
Well, I'm not asking any question, but would like to make a few submissions.
Okay, please go ahead.
One is that what the broad picture is that India spends much less amount on healthcare against its own commitments. Now, aiming at 2.5% of GDP for 2025 is a very meager amount compared to even smaller states like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, let alone China. So one strong point of advocacy should be from the academic side that there should be more investment by state and private sector in the healthcare system, at least trying to reach beyond 5 to 6% of GDP. Second submission is that since 1991, when the liberalization started in the country, the state has been withdrawing itself from the investment in both education and healthcare and leaving the field to the private sector. And private sector has responded well, but as everybody knows, private sector works on the primary principle of profit. And the poorer sections, the marginal communities, they cannot foot the bill raised by the high cost medical facilities. So the state, the Raj as a whole, should keep on increasing their investment while the private investment is encouraged simultaneously. Third thing is, there is a direct link between the share in political power and the health facilities, just as between the political power and the educational facilities and other social indicators. Therefore, academics, they should start studying the linkages between the share in political power and their offshoot or exclusion of the communities which do not have the educated share in power. That would be a very rewarding study. GIDS Institute and Indian Council of Social Science Research and other organizations, they should make it almost a compulsory chapter in their research funding, that the researcher should find out the objective data to find out whether there is any linkage, which will be, and how much linkage is there. Third is a suggestion. While we know the problems, as have been detailed very rightly by Dr. Sanghmitra Acharya, there's a recipe which can help. In the normal budgeting exercises, all the state governments and Government of India, they are required to spend about 23% of the total budget for the members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, commensurate to their population. A similar provision needs to be made for the OBC and Pasmada communities. The OBC communities, including Pasmada community, they are about 56% of India's population. So what we need to do is that at least 27% of the total budget must be earmarked for the area and for the population which falls within the category of OBCs. OBCs are well defined since 1990 when the Mandal Commission was in force. If that kind of diversion of funds takes place, earmarking of funds takes place, then the less serviced area of Pasmada communities, the scheduled caste areas, OBC areas, they will get the attention, and planners, budget planners, they'll be forced, they'll be required to divert the funds to those areas. So medical and health infrastructure would improve. And of course, last point I wish to make is that in view of the huge shortage of doctors, especially MBBS doctors, Government of India and the state government, they need to tap the services of Ayush category, like Unani doctors, Ayurvedic doctors, homeopaths. They are more easily available than the MBBS doctors. So if they are assimilated, integrated in the system of healthcare, I think the artificial or the well-known shortage of doctors that can be reduced. Thank you very much for being very patient. If there is any question arising out of my suggestion, I'll be willing to
Thank
find
you,
out.
sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words.
Welcome.
Next, anyone else?
Anybody from the online?
Anyone else?
Smith, hi, no, Ashokpur Mehta.
Yeah, actually, what I would like to say that this is not a question, but I will give some insights that 70% of health visit and 50% of beds are laying there in private sector health facilities. And these health facilities are not accessible to marginalized groups. So in that sense, and also the expenditure of health is increasing. The out-of-pocket expenditure for marginalized groups and other poor is very painful because they are not affording for that. And whatever in new health programs has implemented, that is in secondary type of health facilities, not in private sectors. So in that sense, the primary sector and government sector is not getting emphasis on budgetary sense. That means the marginalized groups are deprived for that. So in that sense, how can we say that the, and other example I can give that in BRICS countries, once I have also compared, in BRICS countries, the health expenditure is lowest in India. And in 2021, the expenditure of that budgetary allocation is higher than the 2022. So, in 2020, that the expenditure of health allocation in budget was high, but in 2021 it was lowest. So when COVID has come, that means we are already in minus budgetary allocation. So how India has coped with that? So in that sense, if we are saying that the allocation of budget is less, that means we are, but we have less health problem is not true.
Yes, Professor Acharya.
Thank you so much for your observations and points, beginning both from Professor Abhidi's observations and Professor Agarwal's. I'm sure they're going to be useful for me to, since it's a work in progress, I'm sure it's going to help me out. I would really want to thank Dr. Anisa Ansari for bringing in this very important point, sir. When you say that we are already one of the lowest, countries which has the lowest share to health when it comes to the GDP. And that's perhaps the reason wherein I'd want to connect with Professor Agarwal's observations in terms of, the positive scenarios which the NFHS 4 and NFHS 5 data is telling us. I'm sure all of us will agree that the health data has been showing an improving trend. There's no doubt about it, whether we take demographic indicators or any other indicators, perhaps across social groups. The point I'm trying to make is when we look at these social groups and the gaps which are persisting, and that's where perhaps it becomes important to take on board Dr. Senapathi's observation. Despite the upward trends, if we continue to have these gaps, there is something very wrong somewhere. And that's where perhaps I'm trying to say that maybe the group-specific strategies are important. And what you said, sir, in terms of the political context of making these services accessible, if I may put it that way, the political power which is important in making health as a service rather than a commodity to be bought over. And that also brings into the post-liberalization era, the structural adjustment programs. Now, the very idea of this public-private sector domain that have evolved in terms of healthcare services, the public health sector has disaggregated in some sense when it comes to the private healthcare services. The notion that private sector is going to provide, quote unquote, better health, and is also calling for a larger share of expenditure, out-of-pocket expenditure. We are ranging somewhere to the tune of 60 to 70% of the total expenditure is out-of-pocket expenditure, highest among the other countries. So from that point of view, I think it really becomes important to take on board how long do we rest at 2.5, less than 2.5% of the GDP, which is being attributed to health for that matter. And therefore, I think it really, in fact, I want to thank you for bringing in the context of Ayush doctors right here. Very rightly, while COVID was a marker point which reflects how the budgetary allocations was raised to combat COVID, and we see that we don't have enough personnel at all different levels. We have a ministry which has been bringing on board the Ayush as a different streams which are embedded within Ayush, which perhaps also brings us to the nuance of the local healers by way of Ayush and even outside Ayush. A lot of services to the remote areas are being provided by these people. Where the 108s can't reach, it is these people, the traditional birth attendants for that matter, who are providing the care. So I would probably be happy in terms of kind of joining you in saying that this is the realm which needs to be included over there, despite the fact that in the formal system of public health, Ayush practitioners, Ayush doctors are fairly much a part of it, at different tiers, PHCs particularly, and the tiers higher than PHC, we are supposed to be having specialists from the Ayush also. But the discrepancy which I want to probably table here is the way Ayush doctors are perceived as caregivers vis-a-vis the doctors of Western medical system or Western systems of medication, if I may put it that way. So the conscious unlearning that we've done towards the practitioners of Ayurveda, Unani, homeopathy, etc., in the light of how when the Western medicines comes in, is where perhaps we have to come on board. Not forgetting that the resurgence of this system has also kind of brought in yet another dimension of accessing care from these realms. These services or these systems of healthcare provisioning, which were comparatively cheaper as compared to the allopathic system, because of this resurgence, have also become expensive and perhaps gone out of the reach of the common man, particularly those of us who are from the marginalized background. So while the system accommodates this in many ways, but the barriers exist, and that's where perhaps becomes important for us to take note of in case we are interested in reducing the gaps. So I really appreciate the points which have been raised in context of this deliberation, and I am really thankful because these are going to be useful for me in improvising the work which is ongoing. Like I said, it's an ongoing work, and I'm sure it's going to be useful. I hope I made an attempt to respond. Each of your observation is going to be very useful for me. Thank you so much for your responses. Over to you, Professor Raj.
We have two
Thank you, ma'am.
more questions, Manzoor and
Some more.
yeah, and Shivshika. There are series of questions.
Yes,
Hello, ma'am. I think
You can take these 4 questions and then you can reply.
please ask. It should be very brief. Okay, introduce yourself.
yeah, I'm Dr. Manzoor Ali, working here as an assistant professor in GIDS Institute.
Okay.
And I think, first of all, it's a wonderful presentation, ma'am. And I would like to, start with the discussion pointers, where he mentioned about whether, to discuss this kind of a issue, identity is a factor, is a relevant factor. Is it a relevant factor to discuss the health issue? Because if you want to look at the improvement in the NFHS between NFHS 4 and 5. So I would like to bring my own, studies and experience on this issue. And we have been discussing about, health infrastructure. And I don't know how to understand this, when health infrastructure of minority concentrated district, MCDs, has been slashed, and the health infrastructure has been poor in the minority concentrated district. And if I remember, and there has been a lot of hullabaloo in this current ongoing, political campaign, that, and almost to the extent of demonization, when previous government said that to please earmark 15% of all the ministry budget for the minority concentrated districts and development of minorities, not especially to the Muslim, but the minorities. But in this whole scenario where you were talking about social inclusiveness and policy and the environment which is pushing for this government is basically, demonizing the allocation itself for the minority community. So there are a huge contrast that I can see, and that is why the identity question within the within the health sector, that should be discussed about. That is the first thing. Now, coming to the second thing, we all have mentioned about, Corona very slightly. When a particular community, and Professor Sanmitra Acharya has, look at the historically defined identity which, pushed for the marginalization and into the health sector. And there has been a process of a new identity which is pushing to the marginalized space. And when you look at the Corona and particular community was demonized to spread the Corona itself, the Corona means Muslims and Muslim means Corona, then how, this socially inclusive policy will come, and that is why identity question in the health sector should come up. Now coming to the next question. Again, we look at the baby producing community that has been chipped out to the Muslims, and as a larger conspiracy, population conspiracy in this country is going on, and that is coming from the particular dominant political forces in this country. And how we are going to prepare the social inclusive policy in this country, that is the question. And there lies the relevance and the of the identity to be discussed in the health sector. Now, coming to the third point that I would like to mention, the cultural competency. Our chair has mentioned about that cultural competency of it. And there are many markers to that, and we have been discussed, and I have written one working paper for the institute, and I have particularly discussed about the lack of a cultural competency in the Indian health service provider. And there are examples of it, the treatment behaviors of service provider against the Muslim women. Just looking at the burqa-clad women, you behave certain way, then the relevancy of identity become very important in discussing this health sector. So that was my comment. I don't know. I don't want any reaction, but that was my comment to add in this debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Any question?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, myself, Rajesh Roshan, Senior Consultant at GIDS Institute of Development Studies. So just I'll very quickly point out 4 or 5 important aspects which is happening in the health sector, and how we are measuring the progress, and where we need more intervention to come to the very inclusive behavior of the state as well of the center, to come up with the notion of equality. So as we'll start from, as health is the state subject, first point. Second point is that although over the last 10 years, the budgetary amount in health sector has increased. Amount has increased, but percentage to GDP is still less. That is one of the important concerns. Now, third, moving on, the progress over the period of marginalized and non-marginalized, or we can say better off, although there is much progress when we are comparing the rate of change for the marginalized as well as non-marginalized, the rate of change for marginalized is high. But when we are comparing the disparity ratio over the period, through my study that has already been published, over the period, the disparity ratio between marginalized and non-marginalized has increased. This findings, especially in the terms of under 5 mortality and nutritional indicators. Now coming on the fourth important point related to inequality, as Professor Santra Acharya has mentioned about the inequality. So one of my studies is going on, and I have tried to calculate inequality adjusted under 5 mortality for all the state and union territory of the country for NFHS 4 and NFHS 5, and we have found, I have found that the states which are acclaimed as a developed state, in those states, the mortality induced inequality is high compared to the states which are acclaimed as less developed or underdeveloped. Now coming on the next point related to regional inequality in health outcome, health and nutritional outcome. Over the period, the central region, since NFHS 1 to NFHS 5, I have just tried to understand how there is rate of progress across these 6 region, north, east, north, south, east, west, northeast, and central. So my study found that central region remained least developed, or we can say center of highest concentration of poor health outcome on any indicator. And this finding is based on my postdoctoral research funded by ICCSR. So now coming on the another aspect related to it was related to regional inequality. When we coming to intra-regional inequality, the scenario is that within the intra-regional, this is again happening, the region with performing economically better off, in those regions, amount of inequality using concentration index, we have tried to check how these amount of inequality is reducing or increasing. So it is found that the region which are acclaimed as developed region having high rate of inequality. Again, now coming on the disparity other than the identity as Manju sir has mentioned about identity. So I'll focus on the social disparities, focus on the caste group or social group. So within the social group, when we compare the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and non-SC ST, it has been found that the region or the states which are having high concentration of these two population groups are still performing poor on the health or nutritional outcome. So based on all this, the discussion point what I have submitted before you, ma'am, my question is what should be the strategy or policy relevant issue which can be revised, or if the next national health policy coming to existence, we can push forward to include in the new health policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Abidi, may I respond?
Yes, please, Professor Acharya.
Thank you so much for your observations, Dr. Ali and Dr. Roshan. I am in complete agreement with the observations that you've made. I am in no denial that identity is not a factor which needs to be taken on board when we want to understand not only the health gaps, but the very health status, perhaps because we are a diverse nation and there are all possibilities of this diversity translating themselves into differentials, and that's why we need to worry about them. And I'm in complete agreement with that. As pointed out, and I completely get the point of, maybe the Institute has to organize another lecture wherein I can come in with my observations on COVID, and it will be, you've raised some very important points on COVID, especially bringing in the realms of, how stigma works when it comes to access to healthcare, and it cuts across population groups, across the binaries of gender. I would again reiterate on that. Coming to your points, Rajesh, I think you have made some very important observations coming from the research that you've been engaging with. I mean, I'm grateful for you to table all of this. And like you said, data does have its implication in terms of making certain stark informations visible, and perhaps these are the informations which we can take and make use of, how they can be used to address the policy environment, policy making processes. And going by the fact that these differentials continue to exist, and you yourself have corroborated that while we see that the rate of change is better in the marginalized communities, which ought to be better, because you're starting from a lower starting point, and therefore coming to the time point now, the larger change has to happen, and you're corroborating it with the disparity levels being higher among them. So that perhaps brings me to the fact that I would think like group specific policies become important. We can't have one for all kind of a scenario. All these years they don't seem to have worked. So perhaps, as I think Dr. Anis Ansari has already mentioned, if we have these quantum share of different populations which have deprivations of different kinds, can we bring in that in the realm of the policy making process, wherein we have specific policies for groups which perhaps we might need to do an exercise how to club the groups of various kinds in some sense. So instead of having one for all kind of a thing, we need to have specific policies for different groups. That's perhaps where we need to come in to bridge these gaps that are continuing to be evident over so long a period. I wish I had more time, we had more time to perhaps deliberate on this, but I think I've tried to make an effort towards responses. Over to you, Professor Abid.
Two more questions.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir, very brief, very brief.
Just one, it's not a question, it's a insights from the field. It's a micro level insights. We cannot forget the importance of NRHM coming 2005. Recently, we have done a survey related to the health and nutrition of child. During this, we found that perception and narration also play an important role to access and reach the health. Because if we compare the public and private hospitals, हमने देखा कि बहुत सारे लोग, even I meet the numbers of ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers, even they are saying that because they are the main ground level worker who are actually implementing the NRHM. And we find the actual improvement in the health facility, immunization, vaccination, institutional delivery after the NRHM. But still the perception and narration about the public hospitals also play an important role to access. एक तरफ हम कह रहे हैं कि public में उतना allocation है नहीं, public hospitals में इतनी चीजें हैं, but still if just a little increase in the family household income, we deny to go to the public hospital बिना ये जाने कि वहां पे बहुत अच्छा facilities है. लेकिन इसके साथ साथ in terms of institutional delivery, I have talked to different pregnant women जो ये avoid करना चाहती है कि cesarean delivery ना हो, they went to the public hospital. और जो care ही नहीं करती, but we get the good health facility, they go to the private hospital. तो we cannot generalize, but we cannot ignore it also कि the perception and the narration also play an important role. Just share the inception from the Bagpat, Mathura, and Sonbhadra districts. Thank you.
Kavita ji, is there another question or I can come in?
Just one question, ma'am.
Okay.
I think this.
I'm glad that you mentioned about the group specific policy and it's the need of the hour. But while we are thinking in that direction, I would like to point out one thing. And that is that there are glaring identity-induced gaps, and there are a lot of social and economic factors that play in, and not lot needs to be done. But what about the cultural factors? My own understanding is that each community group has its own understanding of health and well-being, which is not always very negative. There are positive practices as well. And we need to take that into account as well, that, when a particular community feels like going for, help, seeking, when it seeks help, when it doesn't, and things like that. So the need of the hour is to incorporate that for any community-specific inclusive policy.
Sure enough. Thanks. Thank you so much, my dear, for bringing that up. Kavita ji, you really pointed out very important thing. How do we perceive public sector provisioning versus private sector provisioning? And it's here that market comes into play in a very big role. Private sector is something which is state's responsibility, and state has been providing with whatever possible, infrastructure, policy regime, etc., and we see its, evidences in many ways. But when it comes to the market impositions, why is it that we believe that private sector is going to give us better health, whereas there is no evidence whatsoever
Yeah.
There's no evidence whatsoever that you pay more money and you will get better healthcare.
Okay.
There's no evidence whatsoever. We can start from reading Neeraj Chandok's work to the work of today. Your colleague right there, who's been working on public-private. So the point I'm saying is, it's not only the perception which are sociogenic, the perception which market could be generating by way of this demand supply kind of a scenario, right? So, and therefore, when state becomes party to this, deliberation wherein private sector has to come in to fill the gap which I cannot fill in as state, where are the congruence, what are those lines wherein the decision to who will do what kind of a thing, how much of sharing, etc., can be laid down. So that's something which you're very clear. I mean, thanks for bringing that up. And that's where perhaps the perceptions become very important in cognizance of what exactly are the services wherein public sector comes in, becomes important, remains important. Even today, when it comes to chronic ailments, we go to public sector, even if I come from those kind of backdrops that you're saying, I don't want to bear the pain, I can decide the date when I want to have my childbirth, I'll go to the private sector. If I don't want I can afford to have C-section, I'll go to the private sector on the contention that they are safe, they are clean, etc. I don't want to have that, I don't have the money, I'll go to the public sector. So that's, and perhaps ढेर सारी गालियां खा के भी आ जाएंगे कि पांचवा बच्चा और छठा बच्चा kind of comments. That's completely fine. Coming to what you pointed out in terms of the cultural nuances, and each community for that matter will have something positive about it. Sure enough, I think that's also the reason why we have so vigorously incorporated the whole parallel, what we call medical pluralism, by way of Ayush being injected in the larger health system, right? Nevertheless, what is important is to take cognizance of, as a cultural nuance, what is it that we think is conducive. Say, for example, Sati Pratha, for example, culturally embedded, although now we denounce it. But then times when it was prevalent, I'm sure all of us would have abided with it, right? Or, the nuance of, female feticide,
Yeah.
or killing of the female children, for that matter, cuts across all social, realms, from northern part of the country to eastern part of the country to the southern part of the country, right? But that's where perhaps the discretion becomes important, whether that's important to be continued with or it is not. Contrast that with the element of purity and pollution for the newly, the new mother and the child. You want to ward off the evil in the sense that you're warding off the infection. You don't want to let the new, people coming from outside straight away go to the mother and the child. Cultural context is you're warding away the evil, but the scientific context is that you are trying to minimize the contact vis-a-vis the infection that the newcomer, a person from outside can bring in, right? So the explanatory realms of the cultural nuance become more important, particularly if you're trying to bring in this context. So I think I'll stop here, Professor Abdi. I know we've shot.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So let me allow to wind up the session. And thank you so much to Professor Sangmitra Shilacharya ji, and thank you to Professor Pramod, and thank you Professor Agrawal, and thank you to inviting me to this vibrant session. Thank you so much.
I think we have come to the last ritual of water thanks before the comes in. I just want one point here. I wanted some comments, but because we are already too much late. But I would just end up saying that whereas West is spending almost 10 to 15% on their health and education, we are still in the range of 5 to 6% in combining both, whereas we should have 6% at least on each of these, education as well as health. Now, I think what we have, the way we have shifted to health insurance from physical availability of hospitals. Yeah, I think in that context, what Professor Manoj was saying, the GSDP health lower means less diseases. Probably that if you just look at from the disease expenditure point of view, it may be true. But building capital, building hospitals, infrastructure, that is also part of the health GSDP. And if it is coming down, that means we are spending less on health and education, because spending on just producing more doctors, it is not easy to say whether it's a health or education. It's a combined. That is what I am saying, combined together. And it is a common know-how to everyone, how our youth is compelled to go to countries like Ukraine where war is going on. And we are not building up our education and health system where we need to spend significantly more, and that is where the employment generation will take place. I think that should be kept in mind. What it was pointed out that preparing for new health policy, I think those concerns should be taken into account, and having a policy at a time when I am dire need of a hospital care, and if we don't have the good facilities available in the rural areas or nearby towns, this insurance card does not help. I think that is what is required at the minimum level. That is how we should look at build the basic facilities, and then private sector can come in. But the primary health has to be done by the public sector, and secondary health probably can be left to the private sector. Thank you, Madam Acharya ji. Very motivating, very thought-provoking lecture, which I predicted before. That shows how many questions, and still I think there are questions in the mind. We are just cutting up. I also thank Abhidi ji for very good chair, and the discussant Manoj ji for just coming up to our this series of Golden Jubilee. Madam Acharya said that probably she need another seminar. We'll be hosting a seminar in Golden Jubilee, I think on the completion of Golden Jubilee in the month of August or September, where we are going to organize climate change and society, where all these elements come in. So definitely we would love to have you one of the speakers there. So look forward to the future opportunities. Now I invite Shilshika to just give a vote of thanks.
I really thank the speaker, Professor Acharya, for bringing on the table such a relevant and interesting issue, and also framing it in such a way that everyone had something in mind to say. I thank the chair, Professor Azra, for summarizing, not only summarizing the lecture, but also giving some policy suggestions. I also thank the discussant for adding spice to the discussion, Professor Agrawal. I thank all the online audience, Dr. Anis Ansari, and rest of them, and all the people sitting in this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye.